Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Succeeding with the VISTA Progress Report Supplement, which we call the VPRS. Thank you for joining us today as we really talk about this important and required annual report and the details that you will want to know when completing the report. This session is truly intended for VISTA project sponsors and staff who have been given the responsibility to collect data, as well as those who are responsible for completing and submitting the VPRS and eGrants. If you are a multi-site VISTA project, and especially if you are an intermediary VISTA project, you need to coordinate data collection with your sites so that one person, typically the project director and project sponsor, can complete and submit the VPRS. And as we go through the webinar, you will also want to think about why and how the information that AmeriCorps collects in this report can benefit your VISTA project and sponsoring organization, as well as what other information that you may want to collect for your own records. I'm very pleased today that you will hear from more people than just myself throughout the presentation. My name is Eric Powell, and I'm an AmeriCorps VISTA training specialist at AmeriCorps headquarters in Washington, D.C. I happily served as a VISTA member in 2006 and a VISTA leader in 2008. And on today's presentation, I'll be hosting as well as facilitating the Q&A at the end of the session.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Cox, and I'm the director of the Program Impact and Operations team for AmeriCorps VISTA, also located at AmeriCorps headquarters in Washington, D.C. I am a proud VISTA alum who served in the District of Columbia from 2002 to 2004, and I've stayed involved in national service for over 15 years in a number of different roles, including working with the Senior Corps program on research and evaluation activities.
Thank you, Rob. We're extremely happy to have you as part of the VISTA family, of course, and thank you for your continued work to support VISTA program as you've done so long and for so well. Next, I want to introduce Stephanie Reitzman.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Stephanie Reitzman. I am a senior advisor with the VISTA program. I've served in a variety of roles over the last 15 years as well to support and strengthen national service. I also served as a VISTA member many years ago in Helena, Montana, and I am currently located in Boise, Idaho.
Thank you, Stephanie. I know you and I have also worked together for many years, and your dedication and commitment to people, and of course, our work in national service is remarkable in working to strengthen and improve the VISTA program. So to both Rob and Stephanie, it's great to have you all with us during this presentation. I also want to introduce Mike Dietz and Colby Wilson from our partners at LSI, who you will see managing the Zoom webinar technology. You'll see them as well as our colleagues Kelly Daly and Brian Mitterer in the chat panel, adding comments, responding to questions, and adding any other information to help us throughout today's presentation. Here's a brief look at today's agenda. We're going to cover quite a bit. We'll start with what is the VPRS? We'll then talk about who completes this report and when. Then we'll talk about what do we do with the data that's collected in the VPRS. We'll show you how to access the VPRS and complete the report in eGrants. We'll then end with a couple of resources to help you navigate eGrants and the VPRS, ending out with an evaluation of today's webinar, and finally answering questions you have about this report. Before we begin, let's get a sense of a few quick things. In a minute, you will see a poll appear on your screen, and the question is, have you previously completed a VPRS? Obviously, it's a quick question, and you know that your responses are either yes or no, but this is obviously a question that would only be for those folks who were VISTA sponsors or part of a VISTA project about a year ago or more. And those of you who have previously completed a VPRS may want to share ideas you have in the chat for suggested best practices for collecting and recording the data. Certainly you've done this before. And by now, you should have already indicated your response in the chat, since it's a pretty quick poll, because obviously you would know if you've done one or not. So we'll give you another couple of quick seconds as you submit your final response to this question. And then we'll go ahead and ask our partners at LSI to close the poll and see what it looks like, just to get a general idea. So the results show 69% of people have not completed a VPRS and 31% have. So thank you for those who have responded. It's good to see that we have some likely new folks here as well as some experienced ones, which is great to enhance the work of our team. And again, whether you have completed a VPRS in the past or not, the information in today's session will probably serve as either a refresher for those who have done one before, an update, and it'll be new information to help you succeed with completing the VPRS on time. So next we have one more quick poll, and this is a slightly different question, just out of curiosity. This question is, have you started working on your VISTA project's VPRS for this year yet? We know certainly today's October 13th, it's a little bit early in the process, but we'll give you a couple of seconds to answer this poll, and you can only select one answer. There's a couple of options. And don't worry, it's not a problem at all if your answer is no, as we just want to see where sponsors are in the process. And as you can see in the poll, you can respond if you're on a computer, just click the bubble. If you're on a smartphone, you should be able to also use your finger to select your option. And the responses are, yep, we've collected data for the VPRS, but have not yet started. Or, I logged into eGrants and looked at the VPRS, but haven't started. Another option is, we started entering data in the VPRS, but haven't finished. Or maybe you're one of the few people who have already finished and submitted the VPRS, got the information done early. You may be on this webinar just joining to assist, and maybe your response is that someone else at our project submits the VPRS. Or you could be in the category of have not started anything yet, or there may be another option that you can type in the chat. So take a couple more seconds to respond to the chat. And again, this just gives us a quick idea of where people are in the process, especially because the VPRS has only been available for a short time in eGrants. But we do know that some people like to start immediately and get it done, while others, for whatever reason, are likely to submit it closer to the deadline. So let's go ahead and close the poll now and take a quick look at the results. So not too surprising, the overwhelming number, 52%, have not yet started anything. And then the next large group is 24% who have started collecting data for the VPRS but have not yet started submitting it. And then a bunch of people have logged into eGrants and looked at the VPRS but have not yet started. That's kind of where we expected this to be just because it is so early in the process. And I do want to say, remember that some VISTA project sponsors have already started, some may have not, but you want to make sure that you submit the data in the VPRS by or before November 13th. And remember, an important note, some VISTA project sponsors may be closed on Veterans Day, November 11th. So if you're a sponsor that is closed on that day, you definitely want to factor that into your planning and your schedule so that you can make sure that you still get your VPRS submitted by or before November 13th.
All right, thanks, Eric. Well, again, the topic today may be a refresher to some of you who have completed the VPRS in the past. It sounds like it's new information for others, and there's lots of buzz in the chats about who completes the VPRS and have any communications gone out so far, and what are the questions that we have to respond to. We're going to cover all of that in today's presentation. We want to start just with an overview of what the VPRS is. We want you to have some background details and a framework to help you understand what we're trying to accomplish through this report. We've mentioned it a few times already, but the VPRS are actually initials that stand for the words VISTA Progress Report Supplement. Notice that last word, supplement. The VPRS is a supplement to the information that sponsors and projects share in the VISTA Project Progress Report, which is a different report completed by sponsors semi-annually. The Progress Report Supplement, or the VPRS, today's topic, is required by the VISTA program. It's not a long report. There are just 15 questions on it this year. And the VPRS is due just once a year. So even though you may be collecting data for the VPRS throughout the year, you only submit this report annually. The VPRS is different from other VISTA reports because its purpose is to allow AmeriCorps, our agency, to aggregate quantitative data from all VISTA projects over a defined period of time. For us, a federal fiscal year. Now, why is that last part important? So the work of your individual VISTA project is critical to your community's efforts to address poverty. And where our other reports, like the Project Progress Report, focus in on the progress being made by your individual project and allows your portfolio manager to understand project activities, successes, challenges, and areas where you may need some assistance. The supplement, the VPRS, the VISTA Progress Report Supplement, allows us to talk about the accomplishments of all sponsors and members collectively across the entire program for a specific period of time. Let me say that again. Information from the VPRS is meant to tell the story of what collectively all sponsors and members accomplished during the federal fiscal year. So, quality and quantity do matter in reporting data regardless of the report. And we want the data you report and the story behind the data you'll use in other reports to be high quality, to be valid, reliable, accurate, realistic. And we're going to talk later about a guide for completing the VPRS that creates basic data definitions and standards that are meant to help improve data quality. Again, we don't just collect data for the fun of it. AmeriCorps, our agency, and the VISTA program use this data to describe and highlight the achievements of VISTA projects and VISTA service. The VPRS is critical in providing statistics that help us conduct outreach about the VISTA program to current and potential sponsors, to help support VISTA member recruitment and more. And we also report this information to members of Congress and the administration to make sure they know what is accomplished in communities with the resources provided through the VISTA program. To give you a snapshot of what the VPRS and other data are so important, why it's so important, let's take a look at some VISTA results from past reports. In this graphic, key data from a past year's VISTA Progress Report Supplement is joined with data from all VISTA projects to help show the impact of the AmeriCorps VISTA program during a prior federal fiscal year. The kind of information that's included here can really, we think, inspire people to apply and want to be part of this program and get things done in communities. For many people, hearing simple statistics like over 8,000 VISTA members serving and $195 million raised from other sources through those VISTA efforts can convey the breadth and the design of the VISTA program. In this case, those statistics help show how VISTA members can be a catalyst for change and have a multiplier effect in communities across the United States, helping to mobilize local resources. Some of the data on this screen was taken from other sources than the VPRS, but all this information and more, again, is an indication that your reports matter.
Thanks, Rob. I just love these impact snapshots. Here's another example of how we use the data to really help us tell our story. We also just want to call out that you all can use this data as well to help tell your story as you're recruiting members, and also, of course, to demonstrate achievements in your community. So knowing that different people have different roles, it's really important to know who is actually responsible for completing and submitting the VPRS on behalf of your project, as well as when the report needs to be submitted. So when it comes time to complete the VPRS, any sponsor that has had a memorandum of agreement and a VISTA member serving during the reporting period must complete the report. So if you're a sponsor with many sites, You're going to need to collect the data and the information from all of your subsites and your members and put all of that data together for one comprehensive report for your project. So I mentioned the reporting period. What is the reporting period? So the reporting period is October 1, 2019 to September 30, 2020. So if your project had a member on board during this time, you're going to need to complete the report. So when do you submit that report? The report is due on or before November 13th. And of course, we encourage you to submit it early if at all possible. This is just always helpful, just so you have a little bit of wiggle room before the actual due date, just in case you run into any challenges along the way.
Remember that to get the information that you need for the annual VPRS, other AmeriCorps reports, and information required by your sponsoring agency, a little progress each day adds up to big results. I'm sure we're all familiar with the phrase, one step at a time. And as I like to say sometimes, Dory on Finding Nemo used to sing, just keep swimming, swimming. I'm not going to sing. Anyways, we encourage you to move along a little bit each day or week to help you see the greater results as you go along for this VPRS and future ones as well. So now that you have all of that context, let's go ahead and show you how to access the VPRS. I'll acknowledge that you may not have, I will acknowledge that you may have already found it prior to this webinar, or you happen to know where it is. And I know some of you have already responded that you may not be the person directly completing the VPRS. But this is a brief walkthrough that's intended for newer projects who will be submitting their first VPRS, as well as for seasoned VISTA projects who may want a refresher. If you do have an eGrants account and have access to it, and if you're someone at your project who will be submitting the VPRS, you may want to log into your eGrants account now just so you can follow along as we go through this. Later in this session, we'll talk a little bit more details about more information about the VPRS and how it works. So starting off, here we are, eGrants, and this is obviously the login page. If you are a supervisor, you likely have an eGrants account for different roles and responsibilities. If you're a project sponsor, project director, or project staff member responsible for submitting reports to AmeriCorps, you should definitely already have an eGrants account that's tied to the sponsoring agency. Now keep in mind, this session will not walk you through the steps on how to create an eGrants account, but if you do need to create one, there are instructions on the VISTA campus website, and you can also talk to your eGrants grantee administrator. Please remember that VISTA members should never have eGrants accounts, and VISTA leaders may only have limited access to eGrants specifically for recruitment and not for any other purpose. So step one is that you navigate to this homepage of eGrants, you enter your username and password, and log in.
Okay, thanks. This is Rob again. I'm just going to stop here for a second and say there are a few questions coming through the chat saying, where do we get access to this information? And we're going to share the guide with you shortly, but we've sent some information out to VISTA sponsors through our normal mechanisms and email that went out a couple of weeks back. So some of that information will have been appearing in your inbox if you're signed up for our listserv and you're logged into eGrants, but we'll share links to that here at the end of this session as well. But continuing, once you've logged into your eGrants account homepage, some of you may already be familiar with this layout if you have an eGrants account and your role calls for it. In the top right corner, you can view your grants and applications that are associated with your organization, as well as view access to the AmeriCorps portal via the portal home link that enables you to access and review VISTA submitted member applications, manage members, invite individuals to apply, all the recruitment and management functions that you may be involved with. In the bottom left section, titled Creating an Application, you access and submit your continuation or renewal project applications each year, as well as submit amendments if needed. Again, this is if your organization is the legal entity that has the memorandum of agreement between our agency and yours to host VISTA members, and you have that role. So if you have questions about these elements, please contact your AmeriCorps Regional Office Portfolio Manager, and they can help you with that. In the bottom middle section, titled Manage My Account, is where you manage your account. If you're the grantee administrator for this project, or this is where you go to assign other roles at your organization to other project sponsor staff. And step here really for the VPRS here involves you looking in the bottom right section. So in the bottom right section, there's a place called Reporting to CNCS / AmeriCorps, and you can click on the link that says Progress Report Supplement. Again, once you do that, you'll see this Progress Report Supplement page in eGrants that shows your grant number, the reporting date, and the due date of the VISTA Progress Report Supplement, the VISTA PRS, as it shows up here. If an extension was given to the deadline, you'll see that here, as well as the status of your project report. So in this case, you can see a PRS reviewed by CNCS. You at first will probably have one in initial entry if you haven't yet submitted it to CNCS. And you have access to view or print the VPRS here. Please note that to edit, enter information in, and submit the VPRS, you'll start out by clicking on the View button.
And so once you do that, you'll be moving on to step 4 here. You're actually going to see the various sections of the VPRS here on this next screen. So this page offers you links to the 4 sections of the report, as well as that final step where you will be able to review and actually submit the report. So again, some of the main pieces you're going to see on this page, again, just reminds you of your grant number along with the due date and the status of the report, and again, the reporting period that this report will cover.
Okay, so now you've got a little bit of pep in your step, some rhythm in your feet, and some dance in your soul, and you've navigated your way to the VPRS and eGrants, and you know how to access it. So let's talk about entering information into and completing the VPRS. As you begin to complete the VPRS, take a little bit of time to admire the beauty around you in whatever form it takes. The VPRS is one way that helps us see the beautiful work that exists in your VISTA project. And just as trees grow and blossom and leaves fall, the results from your VISTA project may ebb and flow. But when you step back and look at what has really been accomplished over the reporting period, it's a beautiful sight and really showcases the work of your VISTA members and leaders in all of the work of the VISTA program. And whether you are the VISTA sponsor who completes and submits the VPRS, or you just have a simple role in collecting and compiling the data, here are some tips for success as you work. Some of these tips probably seem simple, common, and obvious, but we really want to make sure that you don't leave anything to chance and that we set you up for success so that you can make this process efficient and hopefully relatively easy. So first, work with your VISTA members and leaders as well as VISTA project staff to regularly track data. For you to get data, you want to make sure that you understand how it was collected, as well as what we, AmeriCorps, mean when we use certain words for the data. Keep in mind that inaccuracies in information can easily occur if you don't take the time to read and comprehend. Second, make sure that you double check and verify the data. You want to plan ahead to avoid making mistakes in data by ensuring that your data covers the entire reporting period, and have the people who submitted the data to you double check the information is correct. Make sure the substance of your data is documented so that if there's ever a discrepancy, or if you happen to accidentally delete the information you have, it can easily be retrieved. Third, you always want to have a backup copy just in case. We know in this virtual world it's important to save everything elsewhere. So don't just rely on entering it into eGrants. We strongly recommend that you save your data in Word or Excel or somewhere else that you can access it, not just in case of an emergency, but also so that you can have it for your records if you need to use that data for other things for your VISTA project. And then fourth, you can certainly use eGrants in any browser, but just know that it works best in Internet Explorer, but most people have been able to use it in other browsers. We just want to mention that. So if you do have any difficulties and you really, really can't access it, you may want to try using Internet Explorer. On the last slide, I mentioned the importance of understanding what we're looking for when it comes to specific data points. The fiscal year 2020 VPRS instructions and the VPRS guide are extremely helpful resources that give you the information you need to understand the terms, definitions, and what you need to know to complete the report successfully. You can access these resources on the VISTA campus and also in the helpful links handout that you can access in the chat panel in a few minutes. This is a screenshot of the guide on the screen now. And as you continue through the guide, you will see that it contains quite a few links to other resources. These links are critically important as they take you to key information about each of the measures, especially if you're a new sponsor and not quite sure what terminology means or how do you report on certain data. Reviewing this information will help you learn the definitions and the meanings that are critical to collecting and reporting accurate data. And this is an example of what you will find if you click on some of those links. This includes specific information, such as the definition of key terms found in the measure, as well as information to help you measure and collect the data. Paying close attention to this information really helps us ensure that we are rolling up quality data.
Thanks, Eric, and for sharing information about that really important guide. So now we're going to jump back to eGrants to talk more about what you'll actually see when you're completing the report. At the top of this section and each section, you will see a paragraph alerting you that all VPRS fields in eGrants are required if you do not have a number to report for a particular data field. You can just enter a 0. So that's, I see some comments in the chat about what to enter. The information is both in the guide and here in eGrants. And this first section of the VPRS is asking you about community volunteers. You can see some of what we're looking for here, the number of community volunteers who were recruited. This is specifically any volunteers that were recruited by your VISTA members and leaders through your project, as well as the number of community volunteers managed. Two separate questions there. For data collection purposes, and according to those performance measure definitions that Eric just shared with us through the guide, managing and recruitment are two different things. Managing includes the training, direction, and coordination of community volunteers. Again, you can reference that VPRS guide and the definition links for a more detailed explanation. The important thing to remember is that these two different measures should be what we call an unduplicated count of community volunteers supported by the VISTA members. So if you count a community volunteer under the number of community volunteers recruited, don't count them again under the volunteers managed. If you have members both recruiting and managing community volunteers, you may be wondering how to report this data. Just select a data point that best reflects your program model and where the member has spent the most of their time to determine in which data place to report this information. Again, this helps us ensure accurate data by controlling for any double counting. We think about this as just different program designs. Those who are carrying out activities to recruit volunteers are doing different kinds of things than they would be for managing volunteers. So that's what this is trying to capture. This screen on community volunteers will also ask you for the number of veterans and military family members who were engaged as volunteers in providing services to others.
Great. So the second section of the VISTA Progress Report Supplement is on resource development. And so again, you'll be able to find these questions in the guide that Eric referenced, and I believe Kelly has put a link up to that in the chat, so you can see exactly kind of the data points you'll be collecting. But in eGrants, you'll see this section here on resource development. So what do we mean by resource development? Well, we're really interested in what your VISTA members and your leaders have really brought into the project. So first, we're really looking specifically for the financial value of resources. So we want to know the dollar value of any cash resources that were leveraged by your VISTA members. For example, this could be grants that you've received, donations received, or actual funding for an aspect of the VISTA project. The next question we ask here, we really want to know about the dollar value of any of those in-kind resources. This could be food that's been donated for a project, maybe some pro bono services that have been provided, or even space given for free to host a training for volunteers, and so on.
Okay, this third section of the VPRS is all about organizations and systems. So your VISTA project is aiming to address poverty by empowering the community to create capacity building solutions. And this section asks about whether you reached certain outcomes to your capacity building activities. So have the activities in the last federal fiscal year made your initiative, your program, your organization more capable in carrying out its efforts to address poverty? So this section asks how many organizations within your project have been made more efficient during the reporting period. So maybe there have been some streamlined processes, maybe processes have become automated or electronic to eliminate delays with data entry. Has that resulted in your organization, your program, being able to provide services to communities using less money, less time, less effort? Have you become more efficient? Another question asks whether the organizations have become more effective. So think about the organizations, what they can do and what they can do better. Are they producing greater results? Have you reached better outcomes for individuals who've participated in your program as a result of the capacity building efforts of the VISTA project?
So in the fourth section of the VPRS, we look at beneficiaries and those people who really are impacted by the work of your VISTA project. So there's numerous other data points that we could collect, but this year we're looking specifically for information on the number of veteran and military family members served, the number of youth supported, the number of adults, and the number of youth served by opioid programming, if your VISTA project has any opioid programming, and the number of adults served in job training and placement programs. And I know that Rob had mentioned this earlier, but again, just a reminder here that if you don't have data on any of these data points, or if the number is 0, for example, because you don't focus on opioid programming, you can simply enter a 0 here.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. And this is the final section of the VPRS. You get to your favorite part, the review and submit portion. So just like many other things you complete and submit in life, this gives you an opportunity to double check your information, make sure nothing was inadvertently entered incorrectly, like typing 2000 instead of 200. So while you're reviewing, if you notice an error, you can go back and you can fix it. And then when you're ready, you submit. And of course, make sure that you confirm that things have successfully submitted before you celebrate and forget about it. So we're talking about submitting data for the past year. It's always helpful to think about how to be successful in data collection now and on an ongoing basis. So to plan for the VPRS, maybe next year's, here are a few tips that you can implement to help you. To successfully complete the required data, as well as other data that your VISTA project or sponsoring organization may want to do. So train your VISTA members, leaders, and staff on the process and the meaning of the data. Again, we just went through the guide that articulates certain data definitions, standards on how to collect data. Although VISTA members are not completing these reports in eGrants, although your site supervisors are likely not reporting these reports in eGrants, they will be involved in contributing to the reports. They may be responding to the project sponsors, the project directors' request for information so that they can fill out the report. So the more well-informed that they are, the more likely you are to receive accurate data, apples to apples data. Also encourage your members and leaders to regularly track data. This will help in gathering information for your project progress reports, the VISTA Progress Report Supplement, and any other reports needed by your VISTA project and your organization. So make it a collaborative data collection effort so that you can work with them and they can work with you. Create systems and processes to regularly collect data. You know your organization, and you can work with your VISTA project to determine the best way to do that. Maybe having members and sites fill out a spreadsheet or a form, or you may utilize an online system. We're not dictating from our agency, AmeriCorps, how you do that. But if you're a sub-site, you might be wanting to work with your intermediary organization to see if they have a specific method that they want to use. And I'll say the VISTA campus, which we'll talk about in a little bit, offers a lot of resources, templates, and other sorts of things to help intermediary organizations do that. So whatever you do, be consistent in how you track the data, just to avoid confusion, and so people know what to expect. It also helps, you know, again, if you can compare information from year to year. What did we report last year, if we did? Have we seen a dramatic increase, for example, in the number of community volunteers that we recruited? Can we translate that increase to something that's connected to what our activities were for the year? What does that bump look like? What were we doing differently? Those kinds of things are helpful to make sure that we have good quality data, both for this past year as well as for future years.
With all of the great information that Rob and Stephanie shared verbally and Kelly's been sharing in the chat, we really want to support you in your work and set you up for success, especially in regard to the many questions you have around the VPRS. So let's highlight a couple of resources now. As we mentioned earlier, we created what's called a helpful links handout, and we'll post the link in the chat again. This handout has links to quite a few resources that will help support you in relation to the VPRS, including the resources we mentioned earlier, such as the VPRS instructions and the VPRS guide, as well as others. Remember, you can also go to vistacampus.gov and search for additional information specifically on this report and other VISTA reports, as I know there was a lot of questions about the difference between the VPRS and the PPR. And if you don't have a VISTA Campus account already, we strongly encourage you to create a free VISTA Campus account so that you can access additional features such as the Supervisors Cafe discussion forums and really be able to share and communicate with other VISTA project sponsor staff and supervisors. Before we get to answering a few more questions, we would really like your feedback. So if you could take a minute and either click on the link that you see in the chat to complete the webinar evaluation, or when you exit the Zoom session, you'll see it appear in your web browser. We really evaluate all of your feedback and love to see what information you have about this session, as well as suggestions you have for future topics. So please, by the end of the webinar, take a few minutes to complete this brief survey. We greatly appreciate anything you have to say. And one other note is we have an exciting next month topic. Next month, we're doing a webinar/meeting. Next month's session will be a little bit different from our typical webinars. It'll be more of an engaging discussion so that people can share in a large group, and we'll actually be breaking out into smaller groups as well. And the topic is Orienting VISTA Sub-Site Supervisors. Tuesday, November 17th, 2 p.m. Eastern. If you click on the link to register, you'll see a little bit more details about that topic, but we know there's a lot of sub-site supervisors and just site supervisors in general who are new, who want to know how to be oriented, what information do they need to know. We will share information as well as get information from other sponsors as well. So that's going to be an exciting topic. We encourage you to join. So now we get to the time where we answer more of your questions. I want to thank Kelly Daly for answering a lot of the questions in the chat. If you have additional questions, please type them in the chat. If you have a question you would like to ask verbally, please use the raise hand feature. Again, click on participants in Zoom, then click on raise hand, and our partners, Colby and Mike, will let me know, and we'll be able to get your question answered verbally. So a couple of the questions that came in that I think are extremely valuable noting, and I will certainly refer to Stephanie and Rob for these. The first question I'll turn to Rob, and it's a simple question. There was a lot of confusion initially about the difference between the VISTA Progress Report Supplement, VPRS, which is what this webinar is about, and the Project Progress Report, the PPR. Are you able to kind of quickly summarize those, Rob, and explain why the VPRS is such a different report?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. I'll give it a try here. Again, the Project Progress Report is what it very closely relates to whatever was entered into your project proposal, your project application, saying, here's what we're going to accomplish with our individual project as a sponsor with all the sites across our project. Here's the performance measures. Here are the specific activities that are going to be carried out with our specific project. So if one were to compare what was written in the awarded application, your proposal that helped you secure VISTA resources, and what we're asking you to tell us about in the Project Progress Report, those two things would look very close together. In the Project Progress Report, again, you're reporting on what were the individual successes. There are a lot of narrative questions saying, what went well for your particular project during the prior reporting period? What challenges did you have? Are there any needs for technical assistance? Are there any things that AmeriCorps as an agency and your portfolio manager can help support you with to address? Maybe it's a recruitment challenge. Maybe it's coming up with a different strategy for that. Maybe you're not seeing as much progress in some of your capacity building activities that you would hope. That's all documented in the Project Progress Report, which again, our sponsors report twice a year and correspond to the specific activities that were outlined in your project application. And our portfolio managers, our AmeriCorps portfolio managers, who you work with in managing that project regularly, are reviewing that closely. They're providing feedback to you and just marking progress, successes, challenges, and so forth. You get the idea. What makes the supplement, the VPRS supplement, different is that, again, these are 15 or so questions that we're asking of all sponsors for the same period of time, regardless of what specific activities and goals all of those individual projects had. So this gives us a snapshot in time for a particular reporting period. Again, it links to the federal fiscal year. And why that's important for us is because the executive branch, the president, and Congress propose a budget for all federal programs, including AmeriCorps VISTA, each year. So during FY20, this last fiscal year, the way our government works is there is federal tax dollars that are appropriated by Congress during this fiscal year and says, here's what the AmeriCorps VISTA program has to work with. And so the VPRS is really the best instrument that we have to report back to those folks and say, with that pot of money that you gave us for that specific period of time, a federal fiscal year, here's what collectively our sponsors, VISTA members, and communities accomplished. So it's really important snapshot in time that relates to that appropriation. And so again, that's a little bit different than how our individual project progress report works, which relates to what's happening with an individual project, which has different start and stop times during the year. It doesn't necessarily associate with a federal fiscal year. So both of these different data collection instruments, both of these different reports, the PPR, the Project Progress Report, and the VPRS, the supplement, serve different purposes for us, and that's why we ask different information at different points of the year. Now, a lot of the information probably looks familiar. A lot of the information is very similar. It's just over different periods of time and provides a different purpose. Just some of the reasons that we have this separate and different report.
Thank you, Rob. That was a very thorough response, and I think it very accurately told the story and answered the question. So hopefully people now know the difference between those reports and why they're so different, but both important. The next question is for Stephanie. And Stephanie, I think you mentioned this earlier, but I saw there was a lot of comments in the chat and a little bit of confusion around who completes the VPRS. And there was a couple of comments around some people being site supervisors and never having heard of the VPRS. Could you remind us whose typical responsibility it is to complete and submit the VPRS?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so the sponsoring organization, the person that we have the signed legal agreement, that memorandum of agreement, is going to be the organization responsible for submitting the report. So oftentimes this responsibility is going to fall to like the overall project director. If you are a site supervisor, you are likely going to be responsible for giving information to the overall project director. You may do this in a number of ways. This is something you can just go ahead and check in with the overall project director on. It may be that you and your member are already submitting monthly reports or bi-monthly reports to the intermediary sponsor, and then they could be rolling that data up. But if you are a site supervisor, you do not have the responsibility of submitting the report. You'll just want to check in with the overall project director to make sure that you're getting them all the data that they need in order to complete the report.
Great, thank you. So I see a lot of questions coming in. We'll get to a few of them, and thank you again, Kelly, for responding in the chat. Rob, this one's back to you, and it's a quick question, and that is, for the VPRS, does the data only report on full year VISTA members, or do people also include summer associates?
That's a great question. Thanks, Eric, for raising that. This is for any activities associated with VISTA members during the reporting year. So if you had VISTA members, if you had summer associates, if you had VISTA leaders, that would be what you would report on the VPRS. So the results of any activities from any of those member types.
Great. And another question I'll turn to whichever one of you wants to answer this question. It seemed a pretty common thread, and it related to how the VPRS talks about efficiency and effectiveness. And the question was, how do we gauge if an organization or a VISTA project, an organization as part of the VISTA project, has gained efficiency or effectiveness in the categories specified for the VPRS? I think they're just wondering if there's any tips or tricks, either from the two of you or from others on the webinar, about how do we know if something was efficient or effective, and how do we report on that? Any ideas you have?
This is Rob. That is one of the harder things to measure, right? And so I think the starting place is understanding, well, what do we mean by what makes something more efficient, or what makes something more effective? What are the definitions there? And just going back to that guide that we talked about, the definitions for efficient are included in that guide. So in our terminology, if you become more efficient, it means you have improved outcomes for folks who are participating in the program, the beneficiaries of the service, with the same level of resources, or improved or had consistent quality of service with fewer resources. So did we do the same or more with less, meaning less time, less effort, less money? That's efficiency. And the way that you would figure out, did our organization, did our effort become more efficient, as suggested by our definitions and data collection standards, is to count the number of organizations reporting that you're made more efficient. And included in those definitions is what we call a pre-post organizational assessment tool. So that is a tool that basically asks an organization to fill out some questions saying, how are we doing in this way? Did we have some intended support on our program delivery model? You would take that tool basically at the start of a period of time and then take it again later and say, did we see any changes? Can we, using that pre-post, see if there was any change in our efficiency? Basically just a self, and a similar assessment can be done to look at questions of effectiveness. So effectiveness has a different definition, again, included in that guide that helps you understand what we're asking about there, and then references the way to collect that with using a pre-post organizational assessment tool. I believe there's even a sample tool included in the links.
That is correct. And thanks for a reminder about the helpful links handout for links to additional resources. The next question Kelly answered, but I'll read it verbally because I think it's applicable to many people. There's been a lot of talk in the chat about who do we count as volunteers and who do we not count as volunteers. And one of the specific questions around that was, if we have a VISTA member who is helping us to recruit volunteers for our partners, do we count any of these as community volunteers? And Kelly put a very good response, and a very simple response, is that if those volunteers were supporting the VISTA project, they have to be contributing service to the project, because obviously the VPRS is specific to work and service done for your VISTA project. So if the VISTA members and leaders are recruiting volunteers that are doing service, any kind of service pertaining directly to the VISTA project, then yes, you would count those as volunteers. And I'll turn it to Rob and Stephanie to see if they have anything else to add on that question before I go to the next question.
I don't have anything. I think you covered it well.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for two more questions. One of them is an easy one, and Stephanie, I'll start with you, and Rob, chime in if you have additional information. There was a lot more questions early on about volunteers. We talked about being recruited versus managed, and some people said, well, we weren't sure, do we count them twice, and how do we know the difference between recruited and managed? I think you talked about it briefly earlier, but if you could summarize just how they understand what it means to recruit a volunteer and what it means to manage a volunteer.
Yeah, sure. I can take a stab at this, Eric. And again, this is where I know we've mentioned a couple of times, but I can't stress it enough, the importance of really referring to the guide and kind of having that guide out as you're starting to complete the report. One thing to note is that we're actually limited in eGrants in terms of how much text we can put in there. So when you log into eGrants and see the report, you're not going to get like the full question. But if you have that guide handy, complete with all of the links to the definitions, then you're going to have all of that information right at your fingertips. So I think that's incredibly important. But I think one of the things, I think Rob covered this a little bit in terms of the definitions. When we're talking about managing the volunteers, we're talking a little bit more about training the volunteers, helping them with figuring out their service schedule, some of those pieces of it, supporting them during their volunteer service, as opposed to just the actual recruitment of that. We know that a lot of times our members are engaged in both of those, and so it can be really hard to separate that. We're hopeful that we may be able to combine these measures in the future, but for right now, they are separated. So it'll be helpful for you just to think about where your member has really spent the bulk of their time and try to count it that way. I did see some questions that come through that, what if we've been double counting them in previous years? We do some quality control for the data. So if we see something come in that says 500 volunteers were recruited, 500 volunteers were managed, your portfolio manager may reach back out to you just to make sure that's what you mean. But some of you may see a drop. If you've been kind of double counting them in the past and you're not double counting them now, it may look like those numbers have decreased. And so that's just something you can let your portfolio manager know as well, that you're now aware you're not supposed to be double counting them, just so it doesn't look like there's been a big drop in your performance. And Rob, I don't know if you want to add anything else on the difference of the training and managing.
No, I think you've got it nailed. I think it's a common question that we get. What's the difference between those two things? And just going back to that guide is where to go. And when in doubt, I think just think about where do VISTAs spend more of their time? You know, what are they really trying to do? Are they trying to focus their efforts on recruitment, or are they really involved in more building out systems for management? So I think that's all I would have to say about that.
Thank you both. And due to time, and let's move on to the next slide. We'll stay on for another minute or two and answer a couple of questions that may come in the chat, but I do want to quickly summarize by saying we've reviewed a lot of information today about what the VPRS is, who completes it and when, what we as an AmeriCorps do with the data, of course, how to access and complete the report. We've showed you some resources. You completed an evaluation. We answered some questions. And then we want to remind you that this VISTA Progress Report Supplement, VPRS, is due by or before November 13th. So please plan ahead to collect and compile the data and submit it in eGrants by the deadline. And finally, I do really want to thank you for joining us on today's webinar. We really look forward to seeing you again on a future webinar. I especially want to give a huge shout out to our presenters, Rob Cox and Stephanie Reitzman, as well as to Kelly Daly for answering thousands of questions in the chat and really helping us understand how this VPRS report works. I also want to thank Brian Mitterer for all of his expertise and knowledge, Barbara Reynolds for her editing, and of course to our partners at LSI, Mike and Colby, for helping us to manage the Zoom technology. We appreciate all of the great work that you are doing for the VISTA program and also for your communities. Thank you so much for being attentive today. Let us know in the chat if you have any couple of questions in the next few minutes. And this concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.